This is beautiful. What's up, Brooklyn? Yeah, give yourselves a big old round of applause. It's very good. Look at all these multi...
Can I have like a black power fist?
Right. White people be careful. White people be very careful.
All right.
It's gonna be that awkward all night. You signed up for the conversation about the conversation. So I was hearing the beautiful intro. Can we give it up for the Brooklyn Historical Society? Yes, one of us can give a lot up. And Raquel was backstage, and she was very glad to hear how her name was pronounced, which was simply Raquel Cepeda. What do you think when people call you Raquel Cepeda?
It's really irritating when people call me Raquel Cepeda because it kind of puts me like in a box. It's like I'm American, I'm ambicultural. I'm not really multicultural. I'm very comfortable being American. I'm very comfortable, being Latino. For me, that hyphen is not something that separates, but kind of bridges me to both. So when I hear somebody like Raquel Cepeda, I feel like you're kind of like putting me in a box, and you really are not open to receiving me fully. And I'm here to be received fully. You understand what I mean? So please, if we meet outside or you want, buy my book, you want me to sign it, please don't call me Raquel Cepeda.
Rachel Cheese, ladies and gentlemen. Rachel
Cheese. And if you call me Rachel, I'm not even going to pay attention to you.
Right. And Tanner, just a question for you in front of this crowd. You wrote a book called "Some of My Best Friends Are Black."
Yes.
How's that working out?
It's been great, actually. I have 3, 4 now since finishing the book.
So you've increased the number of black friends since publication.
I mean, it's like a 400% increase from 0.
So you're doing better than America.
I'm doing much
And how
better
about
than America.
Latinos?
Sucking wind.
Oh,
One.
She's right here.
I went on a date with a Dominican girl 10 years ago.
How come you held on to that until now?
I don't know. Somehow it just came back to me.
Wow.
We are learning about each other right now in front of a live. What's up, C-SPAN? All 5 of you.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys destroy C-SPAN just by showing up. That's amazing. No, we're so glad to have you here. We really, really are.
And I want to apologize to C-SPAN for the shits and fucks I'm probably going to say.
Oh, it's going to get crazy fucking dirty up in this bitch.
Yeah. C-SPAN's never coming back to Brooklyn Historical Society after this. They're going to be like, we sent a crew out there, we couldn't use any of the footage, waste the taxpayers' money.
Yeah. So the proposal we have for this evening, we don't have a separate moderator. We're going to moderate each other, which has worked well in American history. We proposed to address one topic, which is right off the news, Ferguson. Something real light, start real light, real easy, comes to a solution like 3 minutes from now. And then many of you have noticed on your chairs there are cards with topics that you want to discuss. We've been looking at the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag about race, and so we'll kind of dip into that virtual hat or the physical hat at some point, ask you to pass those to the aisle and hear what you have to say, and then we'll actually share the microphone with you and verbally hear what you have to say. Is that okay with you guys? Is that
and when you see us on our iPhones, we're totally listening to you on Twitter.
Yeah, we're not texting people not here, making
exactly.
later. Yeah. So, you guys ready?
All right, Ferguson. About to jump off again, maybe, possibly. We don't know, according to the governor of Missouri.
State of emergency, it's pre-declared.
It's a pre-declared state of emergency.
So they're just ready for the doubtful whatever.
And confirmed on Fox.
You know it's true.
Yeah, so you know some shit's going down.
Did anybody see our former mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, on Fox News recently? So you guys love yourselves. Good for you. You didn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
You didn't watch that.
Or you're just not admitting it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Insofar as Fox News can be said to represent a segment of white American society, they are all primed for the next coming of Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton to just erupt out of this in Ferguson. And it strikes me as when I saw it, I thought immediately of circumstances in New Haven, which happened. I was reading about the other day.
What in New Haven?
Bobby Seale was on trial in 1969, 1970, back in New Haven, and there was going to be a huge protest. All the white Abbie Hoffman leftists, all the Black Panther radicals were going to come to the lawn at New Haven and do a big demonstration. Just been huge, violent demonstrations all over the country. And the governor of Connecticut and the president of Yale were all petrified that this was going to turn into something like what we saw in Ferguson in August. But the governor of Connecticut knew wisely that the first way to set off the powder keg would be to send in and prime everyone for the fact that there was going to be each thing. So what they did, they quietly assembled the National Guard. They had everybody on standby, and they just told no one. And they just said, go have your demonstration. And then nothing happened.
Yeah.
They had the demonstration, everybody went home, and then, it was over.
But that's not what's happening here.
No, that's not what's happening here. The Governor Nixon in Missouri is doing everything he can to precipitate what he says he wants to avoid, in that he's getting everyone primed for the fact that the black people are going to go crazy.
So can I ask you to speak for all white people really quickly? I'm so relishing this moment. Is he just doing this for white people? Right? Is this like, hey, white people, I got you. I know you're nervous. Let me send in guns to protect us from what's about to go down. These ne'er-do-wells, these rabble-rousers.
He's a politician, so he's trying to cover all his bases. What the governor of Connecticut did in '69. Should you have law enforcement standing by in case the whole thing goes sideways? Of course. Things could go sideways anytime there's people are on edge like this. But he's setting up the whole thing. Oh, we got a council with all the black ministers, and we're going to talk, and everything's going to be fine, and we're going to do everything we can to avoid this. But all you white people go buy handguns just in case. Like that's the subtle message behind it, by saying somebody got a hold of the budget appropriation of the Ferguson Police Department from the last month, and it's just like $50,000 in rubber bullets, $50,000 in beanbag guns. I mean, and they're preparing for all of this, and of course, we saw what happens last time. So
how are they going to miss all the white protesters when they unleash, the military?
They'll hit all of them
on the community, really, for selling out.
Well, I mean, they're just going to go. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, really? Well,
you sent me this link for the Sean Hannity show
right.
on Fox, and he was using this. Did you see it?
I did.
He was using.
It made my day worse.
It was just crazy. He was using the same terminology that I heard on the news, especially Fox 5 after 9/11. With explosive situation, threatening violence. Something's going to erupt. It was like all of this, really, just to scare people, right? And then Giuliani went on there.
Yeah.
And said, I handled the situations like these before. And that was really incensing, because situations like these are not situations. They're the death of Amadou Diallo. And actually, thank God for him that 9/11 happened, because he became the 9/11 mayor and made $52 million plus on 9/11.
Right.
But Amadou Diallo was gonna be the legacy that he left behind. But him talking about this situation, I've been handling situations like this, was very dismissive, and it brought up for me the whole idea of this phrase has been thrown around a lot as of late, white privilege. And I know you despise that term, and you have a good reason to, and I wanted to get into that.
Right. Well, white people have tons of advantages in this society, and there are a lot of people like Bill O'Reilly and Fox News who deny that this exists and deny that white people have advantages, which is stupid. But to me, whenever you're talking about the advantages that white people have, you have to sort them into two different categories. One is the ill-gotten gains that white people should not have, and the other is things that white people have that everyone else should be accorded also. And
so human privilege.
Human privilege, yeah. So
you should start saying that instead of white privilege.
You heard it here first, y'all.
Some people would
trademark. Trending.
White people can walk around in the society without the fear of getting shot in the face every day by the police, and some people would define that as white privilege. I would define it as citizenship. It's just the baseline of how we should be treated as a society, and so I feel like you get that word attached. That word is very popular right now, and you get that word attached to something like this, and we start focusing on all the things that Tanner has that are bad because he has them, rather than focusing on the true problem, which is what happened to Michael Brown.
Well, I mean, when you talk about white privilege, for me, it's really not about white people. It's just a reminder of what being born non-white kind of confers.
It's like a substitute for non-white disadvantage.
Exactly. It's just an easier, cooler, sexier white privilege. Or you
it's
got
fewer
white
syllables,
exactly.
right? It fits into a tweet
white
better.
Privilege.
Well, it allows you to project resentment on. It allows you to
Yeah.
project resentment on white people rather than feeling bad about yourself.
But I think it's a misnomer to think that just because you're born white, you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You're part of the 1%. But I think that we should start looking at it as we lack basic rights. Like, for example, we're both parents. And I remember, when I first held my son, first I was like, wow, I can't believe I had another kid after 15 years. That was the first thought. Second thought was like, oh my God, he's so cute. He looks Chinese. Had a baby with a Haitian man. And the third thing was, well, damn, I'm gonna have to worry at some point about him going to the store. And about
That was
somebody
your third
to see.
thought
That was my third
about
thought.
your newborn child.
My daughter's right there, and she saw me panic.
Is she
And
telling
I
the
was,
truth right now?
and I
Okay,
got so,
verified.
I had no postpartum depression. I was really, really happy, about him being born. But I just started shaking and panicking, and my husband and I had this conversation when everybody left. Like, I have to think about people not respecting him or loving him the way I love all my neighbors' children, regardless of what color they are. I have to think about him going to the store and not coming back. I have to think about teaching him actually, to question what he thinks, what he's being taught in school, but at the same time, don't go too far with authority because you can get shot in the face. So
Or the
these are
back,
all the
yeah.
things, or in the back.
Yeah.
So these are all the things that kind of lead to the stress. And
Right.
it can lead to resentment. And I think that this whole idea with don't shoot and what's going on in Ferguson is just, like you said, it's about human privilege. And it's about really people, and just black, white, whatever, being upset at what we don't have when
Well, right.
non-whites are born into this world.
And what I've seen, I mean, there's so much beauty in Ferguson in terms of the creative response, because I think the government playbook is the same, right? It's like arm up and threaten force, and then apply force in disproportionate measures, and kind of reinforce the status quo. But the response on the ground has been this black youth movement, has been this very much more gender open, in terms of the roles that people are playing. It's been artist driven in a way that we haven't always seen before. And I'm like, it makes me feel old, and I don't always feel that way, but watching some of these young people in Ferguson respond so creatively and so persistently, whether it's the Ferguson October weekend, whether it's the pretending to be dead and lying in the street, these new forms of creative protest that kind of marry the internet with art, and they're still nonviolent, but they're very persistent, they're very poignant. That's the new twist. The state hasn't changed, but the people are changing. And I find that pretty interesting. I don't see a lot of people talking about that, certainly not in the Fox Newses. But,
Of course not.
Yeah.
What's the difference between what happened with Mike Brown and then Trayvon Martin and Oscar Grant and name after name before that in the response?
I think there's been a little bit less co-opting by traditional organizations. You have new groups forming out of this. You got Hands Up United as creative example. You have it's not just, Sharpton's there. He's always there. And I'm not here to necessarily diss diehard Al Sharpton, because his heart is in a good place in most of the times, but it's not his show. It's not the Reverend shows anymore. There's a whole new cast of people we haven't seen before. It's like Tef Poe, it's rappers from St. Louis who are on different mics, and they're starting newsletters. I remember seeing, I think it's DeRay McCassin, I can't remember his last name, but they set up, there's a startup product called LaunchRock, which tech companies use to launch their products. It's like a landing page. If you're interested in a cheaper way to get luxury car service, problems we can all identify with, sign up here, right? And this is like the problems of the 5% that a lot of tech is oriented toward. But these young activists were using that same platform to build their mailing lists for a new movement. And that is different. That's interesting. That's not spokesmanship-based leadership. It's not sort of media designation or knighthood being bestowed upon someone to say, like, oh, let's go to Obama and see what he thinks. Like, the president's kind of incidental to all this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good, because he's not going to be the president for much longer.
Right. Well, I'm sure that the Hannitys of the world and everybody else that's reporting on this on Foxes and Lou Dobbs and even Don Lemons.
What was that smile about?
No, I have this inside thing, Leminism.
Yeah.
So we always talk about all the stupid shit Don Lemon says on the daily. And we try to.
That sounds like a Tumblr waiting to happen.
Yeah,
That's something we sit around.
like a
So what do you think is going to happen with the grand jury?
Well, I think that he's going to be acquitted.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do we
Based
all
on-
agree?
And I
Can we
think-
poll the audience?
Yeah,
Who
raise your
thinks
hand
that?
if you think no charges.
No indictment.
No
No
indictment.
indictment.
Hands up for no indictment.
So there are people who think
And then
he's going to be
hands
indicted.
up for indictment. a
And then-
vast minority.
Not deserves indictment.
But no,
Yeah,
will be
exactly.
indicted. Using your psychic powers. We're all Americans. We've seen this played before. Yeah.
Right, yeah, I think he's gonna walk because,
Julian,
I mean, the problem is that, you know, nothing that happened that day justified the shooting of Michael Brown, but there is this brief interval inside the car that we don't know exactly what happened, and anytime there's that sliver of uncertainty, it goes the cops' way. And that's just what's gonna happen. So the question is what we do with that information once it comes out.
The governor stands the troops down, sends in cupcakes, and true officers of the peace. And just, actually, what I'd love to see the governor do is just show up, open mic, right? Like the British Prime Minister does, and just take it, right? Just physically hear the people, because he seems to have been so tone deaf, and so much of what is needed is grandiose and systemic and requires funding and negotiation, but so little of what is needed is just the knowledge that you're being heard. And I feel like if he sat in a room like this and just took it for like 5 hours,
I
right?
don't think
And
he
just hear
cares.
people, it'd be beautiful press for him.
Oh, but
Right?
I don't think he cares. I think he's like another. I mean, he's coming off to me like another slightly less evil version of Giuliani. I don't know. I don't know what's gonna. I think there may be violent reactions, but on the positive side, if we can even glean something positive from the situation, I do see a new political movement happening. I do see what you were talking about the other day, which was like libertarian and liberals coming together. Because I think this whole Democrat-Republican crap is nonsense. Where I come from, actually I'm from Harlem, but my parents are from the Dominican Republic, there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people of different political parties. If you know, I may not agree with what you're saying, we may be kind of close, and I'll just start my own party.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. I think we need to stop looking at things in boxes. As Americans, we're just obsessed with like cramming ourselves in these boxes. And the fact
One
is we're
person
getting
lightly agrees with you.
okay. But on the positive, but on the positive side, we are seeing alliances. You know, like I mean, did you see Senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul,
yeah.
on mayor? I mean, you know, he was saying some shit that I can like rock with if he actually, you know,
Follows through on that.
yeah,
What are
the
these-
war on drugs and.
What are these new activist organizations asking for vis-a-vis Ferguson?
But to stop shooting black and brown men.
Well,
So there is
Obviously,
that, but
there
there's
is
also
that.
representation, right? In terms of, you see the disconnect that was revealed very strongly about who the police are versus who the populace is.
Right.
You see there's a very perverse relationship between how the government is funded and the imposition of fines, petty fines on people, which encourage the cops to basically have a stop and frisk type attitude,
Right.
but get paid for it, and that funds the whole court system. There's cameras on police, right, as a pretty specific request that's come out of this that's gone far beyond Ferguson, and
Right.
probably 7 other things I can't remember, but many of you in the audience probably know off the top of your head.
But I thought they came out of Garner, out of Staten Island, the whole thing about equipping policemen with cameras.
But
and
that, yeah, I mean, it was similarly timed because we don't have
Right.
footage of Ferguson,
yeah.
right? So there's this question of what happened.
The problem with the main thing I have a problem with of what the activists are coming at this is the representation angle, is that they're saying, oh, with this town, it's majority black, but it has a white city council, white mayor, white police. We need more black representation so that we control our own destiny. To me, that is a false tack for them to take because they're not questioning the basic premise underlying that, which is, and this was explained to me by the principal of my old high school, because I used to live in one of these inner ring suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama. And the reason why cities work is because you have a broad tax base and a broad array of social services. You have old people who are paying taxes, but they're not using the schools. You have young people paying taxes, but they're not using the Medicare elder services. You have businesses that pay taxes, but they use the roads and the bridges, but they don't use the schools. So you have a broad and varied tax base, but not everyone is taking advantage of the services. In these little towns and fiefdoms and suburbs, you have no industry. You might have some light retail tax base for sales tax, but your primary tax base is property taxes. And some of these like fees and stuff that's coming from these
Poor
citations.
taxes.
Yeah, poor taxes. So, but meanwhile, instead of this varied base where people are using some of the city's services, but not all of them, everyone in that suburb is there for one reason, to exploit your most expensive public service, which is the good public schools in the suburbs. It's a completely untenable system because only way that works is if you have extreme wealth. The Bronxvilles and the Mountain Brooks in Birmingham and these really, really wealthy places where they have exorbitant property taxes, they can afford to keep the world out, not have any retail, not have any commercial industry, and support an excellent public school based on nothing more than property taxes. It doesn't work for anyone else. It doesn't even work for middle-class white people. Like doctors and lawyers, people who don't have accumulated wealth, those systems are even still unstable, which is why those suburbs continually have to expand and sprawl and acquire more land to increase their tax base. And so these places like Ferguson, it's a completely untenable model. And yet black people are coming in saying, well, we need to run Ferguson. Well, once black people are running Ferguson, I mean, you think white people don't give a shit about Ferguson now. Wait till it has a black mayor and a black city council. Then white people are really going to be excited about it, right? So once it's an all-black city with black leadership, then the tax base is going to shrink even more because white people are really going to be gone from there, and then the city services are going to decline even more. And yeah, you've got black police, so there's no more Darren Wilsons, and that's great, that's an advancement. But essentially, rich white people have designed a game that's rigged, and black people and working-class white people are saying, we need to win that game. It doesn't make any sense. The only reason black people need to take political control in Ferguson is to say, we want to be annexed by the city of St. Louis so that we have access to St. Louis taxes and services and infrastructure. These little fiefdoms, the balkanized city-states that we have organized are the problem. So to say black people need to take charge of Ferguson is to misdiagnose the problem.
And it just can't be a black body. It has to be the right black body because, I mean, look at Alan West, Michael Steele. I mean, there's a bunch of George Zimmerman, who I'm embarrassed to say is half Latino. I mean, you have people that have this, they're not the right people that get pushed into these jobs so they can fill some kind of quota.
Here's another, you went to the system of money and like borders that are drawn that kind of disenfranchise people. There's another thing that I haven't heard talked enough about with Ferguson, which is police and their training or the lack thereof and the attitudes that are in their heads.
Right.
And there's this, this very protective wall that the political establishment builds around police officers as if they're holy figures. They're almost saints and they can do no wrong. And they can do very much wrong because they have guns and badges which allow them to get away with wrong. And a friend of mine, Ron J. Williams, who's from Brooklyn, he drew this map that I wish I'd sketched out for y'all to see, but it's basically like a cop that has a bad day can get away with killing you. If you look like me, maybe if you look like you, probably not if you look like you.
No.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Right? If you're super drunk and no one's looking, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe, but in general.
He gets slapped in the mouth.
But I die.
He's not going to get
day,
killed. Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
yeah.
it's like their perception of your threat and their mood determines your life.
Right.
That's a really flipped up equation, C-SPAN, right? That's that's a really bad set of math. And part of, there's a psychologist, social psychologist out of UCLA, Philip Atiba Goff. And I try to promote his work as much as I can on things like this, because his point is he basically studies racism in the brain. Right? He's a little bit of neuropsychology, a little social psychology, and it's very tempting to think cops are racist.
Right.
But they're not. Not aggressively, not explicitly. Like, that's out of fashion. It's not really cool to be out really like hating black people. You can't walk around just shouting those things anymore. But the implicit thing poisons all of us. Right. The association of black people with less than human and animal threats and seeing 14-year-old boys as 30-year-old men or 10-year-old boys as 30-year-old men, that's all programming that media has done a very effective job with us. And the thing that he found in one of his studies is that the greatest predictor of if a cop is going to shoot a black boy or man or brown boy or man is not their explicit racism, it's their implicit sense of masculinity. And basically, cops that are weak in their own manhood, they gotta flex, right? And so if you challenge them in any way, they gotta put you down, right? Because they don't know how to carry themselves as grown men.
Right.
And can I just add one thing to that? And that's why, at least in my community where I grew up and seen many, many of my friends being victimized by the cops, the thing that we were always taught to look out for were Black and Latino cops because of the sense and history of being emasculated. And the fact that as a community, we haven't dealt with PTSD in our memory. We are a very young country. We are products, whether we're white, black, or other, of the transatlantic slave trade, and we carry in our memory, part of our DNA is PTSD. And part of that is, with black and brown boys, is emasculation. And I've heard a lot of kids in my neighborhood that I grew up with became cops, and I used to hear them in the train in the morning, like, I will F somebody up if they look at me wrong, da-da-da. And a lot of times I have had to be careful, more so with people who look like me and my family members. So there's a lot of things from the bottom that we're not dealing with, not only in the penal system and with cops, but also just in our community that we have to deal with. And I think that at the core, at the bottom of all of this is PTSD. Then you look at, I think PTSD is even correlated to black on black crime and brown on black crime. And how are you gonna stop committing acts of violence on other people when you don't like what you see in the mirror? How are you going to come together and coalesce as a movement when you don't like what you see in the mirror? How are you going to start liking other people when you don't like what you see in the mirror? So I think that a lot of that stuff is really at the bottom of this, is how we're dealing, how we're not talking about race. And thank God we're here. And, and these kind of things in our society a little bit more openly. Without being afraid, right?
So the most interesting thing I've seen in recent months regarding sort of the implicit biases that people have is the guy in, I think it was South or North Carolina, does it matter?
Whoa, sorry if any of you guys.
You
can talk with Hannah after.
Yeah, I'm from the South, so I can.
So I can say
no, but this.
Some of my best friends are from the South. Is that your next book?
So this video went viral. I'm sure many of you saw it. Cop pulls the guy over, black guy. Guy hops out of his car, totally like, hey, what's up, Officer Friendly? Just totally like, it's a Tuesday.
Because he didn't get the talk.
Right, he didn't get the talk. She's like, hey, what's up, officer? And the officer says, I need to see your driver's license. He turns into the car, gets his driver's license. He's like, hands up! And then he shoots
the gas
him.
station, yeah.
He shoots him in the gas station because he reached into his car where he couldn't see his hand. Just to get it. You asked me for my driver's license, I'm getting my driver's license. And then, but the tape kept rolling for like the next hour. And a few days later it came out. It was audio recorded, this officer explaining to his boss what had happened. And he was like, if you watch the video, it's literally the guy just like pops out of the car like, hey, what's going on? Sure, I'll get you my driver's license. And the cop's description of this was, he lunged at me. And it was like so terrifying and dangerous. And the question is, was that cop A, lying to cover his ass? Or B, was that his actual perception of what this everyday black dude was doing, hopping out of the car going, hey guys. And that just speaks to what that guy's perception of the experience was. And what was equally fascinating, it was like the same week, there was the incident where that black actress in LA was detained by the police because there was a report that there was lewd behavior in her car. And she goes on Facebook and she posts this huge martyr statement of, my rights were violated, it was so horrible, it was disgusting, and this, just this diatribe. And all these civil rights leaders come out and get behind her, and it's racial profiling, and the way black women are treated in society, and blah, blah, blah. And then, the LAPD releases the tape, and the officer is totally civil, totally plays by the book. Ma'am, there was a call about a disturbance. I have to investigate. I'm really sorry. I don't want to be doing this, but show me your ID. At one point, he says to the boyfriend, like, look, if she just, showed me her ID, I'd be gone by now. But she's like throwing this, and she's like a spoiled brat, because she's just like, she actually says at one point, A, do you know who I am? And B, she's on the phone with her dad.
Rule number one,
says,
never actually say that.
Right.
You can think it.
And my daddy wants to talk to you. She tries to put her daddy on the phone with the police officer. And in that instance, her perception of it was that she was just going to be the next Trayvon Martin and was the greatest victim of all time. And the cop was like, ma'am, I just need to see your ID, and then I'll leave. And so these encounters between minorities and police are so fraught and so loaded at every instance. Whereas I've never had an encounter with police like that in my life. I run a red light, cop gives me a ticket, I leave. That's it. That's
and
my.
when we run, because we have run red lights, I don't drive, but my husband does. I get tense, especially when we're out of New York. I start to shake, and I'm always afraid something's going to happen to my daughter or my son, even though he's 2 years old. If any of us step out of line.
No, and it's not
scary.
It's not an unreasonable expectation. I heard a story from my older sister. I grew up in a family of three: my mother, my older sister Belinda, and me. And my father wasn't really in the picture. He didn't live with us, and he was killed when I was very much young. So I have a handful of memories of this guy. My sister was in the car my sister was in the car with my father, The cops rolled up. This is Washington, D.C., circa 1976. And the cops rolled up. They decide they're just going full force. He was doing something they didn't like, and principally talking back to them. They grab him out of the car, beat the crap out of him, take him away, and leave my 7-year-old sister in the car alone for hours until a random lady on the street rolls up and convinces my sister to roll the window down. Are you okay? She remembers something about her address, and she's able to get home to my mother, who was livid, obviously, at the time. So yeah, your concern about your small child isn't totally misplaced.
To protect and serve. That's what
Well,
they do.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, not to belabor this, but you just brought up another memory. When I was actually in labor with my daughter, Jali, I was living in Soundview in the Bronx, and we took a cab to the to Lenox Hill. And the cops just stopped us out of the blue. And when they opened the door, they wanted to prove that I was in labor, even though my stomach was out to here. So my husband said at the time, please don't touch her. And the guy was like, get the F out the car, smart ass. And basically, I had to get out, fall on my knees, on my stomach, and beg them to stop. And then basically, and without telling them, you know who I am? I'm a writer. I will get, they didn't care. They don't care. They were white cops. I knew because of the civilian board to, write names and to know where they had their badges covered, and the license plate to their vehicle was turned down. And I was, really young, so I really wasn't thinking about, okay, what next? I was thinking about now. So finally they took my bag, my overnight bag, and searched it for drugs with a baton and just threw it at my husband at the time and said, have a nice night. And when I got to the hospital, I almost lost her because of the stress. So that is what we live in and day out, and it doesn't matter what the hell you do. It don't matter if I was in 12 Years a Slave. It don't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people are getting fed up with. Yes. And I think that people of all backgrounds and all races should be fed up with as our country and your grandchildren are becoming more and more and more non-white.
Well,
by 2043, it's over.
Well, no,
Very happy.
we're still going to have a lot of the money in 2043.
Is that a promise or a threat, Terry?
It's just a fact. It's just a
That was
fact.
such a show.
We have
Like 0.11%.
we have a lot of money, so it's gonna take a while to nudge us out the door.
With those
But
voter ID laws, especially.
The thing about hey, those were my ideas. The thing about the police is that there is a phenomenal arrogance. It's a cultural problem in the police department. I have a friend who's a cop, and he's explained to me a lot about how it works. The NYPD was notoriously corrupt, all the Frank Serpico years and all that, even up through the early 1990s, all the crack years, like so many cops were like on the payroll and everything. And so, but when Bill Bratton and Ray Kelly and these guys came in under Giuliani, as bad as they were for the racial element of policing, in terms of the corruption, they went in, arrested the top corrupt people and marched them out and took away their badges and said, anyone else does this, you're fired. And of course, there's still some corruption in the police department, but that like systemic, deep corruption that we remember from the 70s and 80s was largely rooted out because the leadership said, no tolerance. If the leadership of the NYPD said tomorrow, anyone who commits a civil rights violation is suspended without pay for the first one and fired for the second one, it would end rather quickly. Because it's the same, whether it's steroids in baseball or corruption in politics, when there's a cultural change at the top that says this is not tolerated, things do change, especially in a paramilitary, type of organization like the NYPD.
I think if you, yes and.
Yes, and.
Where my improv people at? Anybody? Thank you. I knew it. You're so front and center, of course. And if it's paired with the training. Because I think we also expect, like we make broad statements that are not backed up by our intrinsic behavior. And we're like, I don't see color, but we do. Like I see it, and I don't want to, but I am trained by the same stimulus that has trained the rest of us. And so I am also racist, right, against me because I've been conditioned.
Don't do that to yourself. It's not.
But I don't want to, right? And I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh, you could be so much more handsome. But there is a level to your point about the PTSD, Raquel. I think there's like a mass therapy that we skipped some steps. We got great words in America really beautiful, florid language about equality and the rights of men and women now too. Congratulations, ladies. From time to time, you get heard, you know. But our nature and our socialization and our habits have been built up across generations. And the statement from the top of the police force saying this won't be tolerated needs to also be supported with some psychological retraining efforts beyond, you know, conflict resolution and diversity training. Our heads are messed up. You know, we've been really psychologically violated, all of us, whether you're the oppressor or the oppressed. And that's gonna take some doing. I had thought about this, I made a chart. I'm like charts that you're not gonna see. Because I got frustrated with our own impatience. I was like, we expect so much in so little time in the great sweep of just American history.
Right.
And like several hundred years of legal disenfranchisement, segregation, dehumanization, and then like extra legal but supported and basically socially acceptable versions of that, 300 years, 400 years. Right. So we're 50, 60 years post that, and we still have a deficit, right? We have a deficit of goodwill, we have a deficit of equality. So we got to project out to like, maybe by the year 2300, we can talk about things like post-racial inequality and equity, but it takes some real like time investment. Time is a part of the currency here.
It does. I remember when I was researching my book, I came across, I think it was in Time Magazine. It was probably in Time Magazine.
Perfect segue, Time Magazine, thanks.
Which was the headline. It was about like why there were no black executives on the boards of Fortune 500 companies. It's like, why are there no blacks in the boardroom? And this is in 1982. It's like, because we're 17 years out from the end of legal apartheid. That's why there's no blacks in the boardroom. You know, I always, when I think about sort of my own life in relation to America's racial history, I'm actually not, you know, I'm just poor white trash. My great-grandparents were actually Southern Louisiana sharecroppers. So there you go. And, you know, my grandfather got to leave the farm and get a job with the Works Progress Administration and then got some VA benefits after World War II. And, you know, and we build up and build up. And now I'm this, you know, upper middle class white guy in 2014 who kind of gets to do whatever I want. I'm not rich, but it's kind of because I chose to not be rich because I chose to do something that doesn't pay me any money. But I could have chosen to make money. And so, but that process, start to finish, was about 80 years. So if it takes 80 years to go from, you know, sharecropping to upper middle class, total freedom and opportunity and privilege, as some people would say, it takes 80 years if you're a white man.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're only, like you say, 50 years out from the end of legal apartheid. Where should we be? You know, gauge yourself on that spectrum. And since, you know, my family was also incredibly lucky and we worked hard and did everything right, since, you know, 1968, black people have been kind of unlucky in a lot of things, and you know, we continue to do many things wrong that retard that progress.
Well, I think that non-white people in America should do what they're doing in the Caribbean, what 14 nations are doing in the Caribbean, which is getting together, having conversations, and suing their former colonizers. And even though we all know that nobody's going to win, and they may not win, and it's fine, the good that comes out of it is conversation and dialogue. And when I actually read in that, you know, in the papers that they were talking about PTSD, I just couldn't believe it because I hadn't seen, before I said it so brilliantly, that PTSD was something that we carry in our memory as people, regardless of what color we are, who are new Americans. And I also think that because, especially in New York City, we're so diverse, right? I wish there was another word we have to come up with, diverse.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This has to be another.
Relevant.
If there's any
Future-proof.
word that can take the place of diverse, please tweet it to me. I hate using that word. But anyway, we are so colorful and transnational and bicultural and multicultural that we should be looking at our community as larger than just North America. We should be looking at ourselves as Americans. And if you want to look at yourself as Americans and you're Latino and you feel like public enemy number one, for example, pat yourselves on the back because America started in the east of the island of Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic. It was the first, quote, successful, however you want to define that, European settlement, the first place where there was indigenous American slavery and also the transatlantic slave trade. So that's why we're so racially ambiguous, if you will. So we have to start looking at ourselves, I think, not only as an insular community, start seeing what other people are doing and start that dialogue and start talking. I think in numbers, right, we're more powerful. Was that a little new agey?
That was very
'Cause
new agey,
I
but
fucking
it was
hate,
also
oh, sorry, C-SPAN, new
beautiful.
agey. Stop.
For those of you
No
who
kumbaya.
wrote things down on cards, if you could send them to the aisles, we have a short...
Peacefully, because we have military outside.
That's right, that's right. Send them to the aisles, we'll collect them, bring them up here, and try to dive into some of what you've been asking. Lost track of time on that one. We
Because we're not
riffed.
talking about Taylor Swift.
We riffed hard.
Right.
I don't want to talk about Taylor Swift.
Okay. That's too easy. It's too easy.
So, no, that's the Brooklyn Historical tweeting.
Are there
Yeah, so actually Steph Boogs, is Steph Boogs here? Yes? So you
Stand
tweeted,
up.
I feel what's missing from the national race conversation is the traumatic paranoia experienced by the offender and the offended. Thank you. We touched on that a little bit, but I appreciate you tweeting that in, because I also, like, the idea of chasing victimness, and especially on the conservative side, I love, like, we're victims too. It's like, yeah, but not in the way you think. Right? Like, offenders are also victims of the system. Did you, in your book, Tanner, did you come across any of this
to
idea
call
of
to call
offend-
white people victims because is to me ridiculous.
But what is the
what I say-
burden of the offender?
Well, what
in
I say is
the
that we are all products
Yeah.
of the same system, and therefore we are damaged in different ways. For people of color, there's this PTSD, this feeling of these feelings of inferiority that are sown through the culture and everything else. To be white and a product of that society, it's kind of like growing up next to a lead paint factory. You're just kind of like, it's a little dense, and you can't really see. You're a little slow. And, it's amazing to me because I've now sort of gone through the looking glass where, I'm no expert or genius about things about race, but I have a level of awareness and I know what I don't know, and I sort of know a few things. And I was listening to this podcast a few weeks ago, and this very intelligent, smart political commentators, and one of them mentioned that she had read that an editorial by a black filmmaker that there was this renaissance of black film and TV in the early 90s with the Hughes brothers and In Living Color, and then it died off and turned into Malcolm and Eddie on the UPN and Friends and Seinfeld with no black people, and it's only now with the return of Shonda Rhimes and these films like Dear White People that black people are getting back to having a cultural voice again. And they were totally shocked by this. They were like, I can't believe that. Is that true? And
then you said data.
and then I was like, and I don't fault them for that because 4 years ago I would have said the same thing. But having studied media and advertising and race and culture and everything like I have for doing my book, I understand it. I see it. But I look back on them and I'm like, wow, you don't see that? Like, how can you not see that? But they don't. And so, and like with the what was is parodied in the Dear White People thing, these white people having these, blackface ghetto parties at the fraternities at college campuses, and then black people on Twitter they're deliberately trying to offend us, and it's like, no, they really are that stupid. They really are, and
Actually don't know better.
and I know because
That's
they're my
worse.
people, and I come from that place, and.
So can we just send you to talk to them? Will you be the
Yeah, and
ambassador, the ambassador
it's-
of reasonableness and decency?
And there's a fear of approaching this issue. Like, even I love my wife; she's a lovely person. But every time,
Very, very careful.
Proceed with caution.
This is
no,
on
but
C-SPAN.
it got to be funny because I wrote a book that was inspired by the fact that we had a black president, but I didn't actually know any black people. And I thought, well, that's weird. We've gotten to this juncture where we've accepted a black president, but I don't know any black people. None of my friends know any black people. What's up with that? So everywhere I would go for the next 2 or 3 years and introduce myself at parties, I would say, oh, I'm writing a book about why I don't know any black people. And that would make people very uncomfortable, and it would start a conversation. And my wife, whenever she would introduce me at parties and try to explain what I do, she would be like, "This is my husband Tanner. He's writing a book about, racial integration," and she would never just say, "I'm writing a book about why I don't know any black people," because she was nervous about just being that forthright, just like dumping it out there. And I see that, and I single out my wife, which I probably shouldn't do, but like all my friends do that. They've read my book, they like my book, and it's just so informative, but like whenever it comes their turn to like talk about it, they sort of like seize up and clench up, and then they have a difficult time with it. And what they don't realize, or what white people in general don't realize, is the first phase of dealing with race, you go one of two ways. You either become Bill O'Reilly and you get very angry and defensive about, what are they asking for? We've done enough for them already, and they just need to shut up, and white people don't have it so great. You either get in that angry, defensive Bill O'Reilly mode, or you get in the hardcore, oh my God, my white privilege. You make a YouTube video after Trayvon Martin where you go on and complain about how being white is so terrible, and all the while keeping to take advantage of everything about being white, so it's really kind of disingenuous. And so white people don't approach it because they don't want to go there, because it's a very uncomfortable place to be, either with the anger and denial or with the guilt of the. But what they don't understand is if you go deep and long enough, you get through that and you get to the other side, and like talking about racism is like talking about whether or not you like this beer.
You know what's so funny?
And you get used to it and you get comfortable with it, and all that white guilt and anxiety it's gone.
So
and it's so.
Is this the white promised land that you're?
It kind of is.
Like, I feel like
Can
you
I
should
get a
have some
pass?
different imagery back
Yeah,
here. You're
exactly.
like, I am to the promised land, white people.
Exactly.
It's gonna be okay.
Honestly, like when you.
But in the
Like,
white promised land, only blacks exist. But no, because I'm
That's
seeing
true,
the
that's
conversation
true.
very binary.
Yeah.
That's true. It is.
I saw Dear White People. It was off the hook. I loved it. I especially loved your beautiful face on
Oh,
there. It was
thank
just
you. Right.
amazing.
Thank
You're like
you.
the hottest thing in there. But there were just, and I wrote it down, 3 mentions of Latinos in passing, and so many of the experiences that I saw being played out from both sides were things that I really identified with, and I just felt like
Right.
invisible, kind of, sort of, but not really, because imagine me.
We're
feeling
so
invisible.
obsessed with each other,
It's
we
like,
forget about you.
You forget
It
about
happens.
me. It's like we
It
have to
happens.
have a conversation. I thought that Barack Obama becoming president, right, was gonna open like a dialogue that wasn't so binary. I mean, I remember when he was running the first time around, and I would go like on an airplane or whatever. People would stop me, like, especially older white people, like, we gotta get him in, right? We gotta make change. And I was like, yeah.
Seriously,
And my daughter
really.
would say, like, who's that white lady that's talking to him? And I'm like, yeah, we gotta get him in. But I was excited because I thought we're gonna start having these conversations, like everything exists in a gray space. But we have it. It's like everything is just black and white, and that's not how this world works. We're living in gray. The promised land is gray. It's gray.
Well, it's both.
That's the quote of the night.
There's.
I'm calling it.
In terms of the racial dynamic, you're absolutely right. There is a totally multiracial, multi-ethnic dynamic all along the spectrum of race that needs to be dealt with. It is also true that Baratunde and I have some shit to settle that maybe doesn't necessarily involve Asian and Pakistani people.
But it does involve fisticuffs.
Right. That is why it takes such primacy. It shouldn't be a binary conversation, but black and white defines the continuum, rightly or wrongly, along which the rest of the conversation takes place.
But Latinos, being Latinos, are black and white.
Right.
So you're staring at the solution, but you guys are like pretending like you don't see anything.
Bam! Thank you for being here, Raquelita.
Thank you for having me.
Right.
Thank you.
So when
So we should get to
we
something,
have a pile of beautiful and somewhat illegible thoughts here. Should have stuck to the Twitter plan. This is a question, there's no names on these, so apologies for the lack of citation. Do you think there's an overall anxiety about the changing demographics within the U.S. and the emerging powers of India and China? I ask because rules are changing so fast to allow certain powers to amass so much influence that they don't care anymore. So you mentioned the demographic 2040, 2043, 2050, somewhere by 2060, safely stated, we'll have some changes here, but also the global nature of shifting power and where innovation is happening, where capital is happening, where people are getting educated in different ways. What's the anxiety, Raquel?
we should be very anxious because we're so busy sending our children to war and not looking at each other as human beings that we're just falling behind what everybody else is doing. I think Scandinavia is going to rule the world.
I'm going to call you on that one.
I
Right.
think so because they're investing in their children.
Yeah.
Because they're
really
racially
putting a lot of
homogenous
money.
societies, which is what allows them to do that.
No, they're into conquering because they're Vikings. It's that DNA. It's that DNA.
Right.
And they're spending a lot of money on technology, schools, and the crime rates are very low. But
Well,
you're right. Maybe it's because people
Right.
are
The
bored to death because everybody
monoculture
looks like.
simplifies certainly. Here's where I'll agree. I don't think it's going to be Scandinavia. I think they're too small. I think it's a wrap.
No.
But I do think I agree with you on us wasting time, and whether it's sending our kids off to war or making a binary conversation where it
It's
should be
our
filled
inability to deal with
gray.
our internal demographic problems
Yeah.
that leaves us vulnerable to the challenges from without.
and because other people are getting it together slowly but more surely. We are building, like, we need immigration.
Right.
We need it to stay young. Technically, America, well, we'll be like Italy, right? Italy is old, physically old. Their population, the young people can't support the old people because they stopped having sex or something too long ago, and the pyramid's all inverted over there. And then they got super anti-foreigner and like barred the gates, and they have no new blood, no new ideas coming in. And what sustained the U.S. through all this drama is that by force or by lure, people kept showing up.
Right.
And now we're threatening that, and that's internally, but I think with respect to what's happening around the world, we're risking sending amazing talent and amazing ideas away, saying, like, your brilliance isn't welcome here, because we have this short game view that we have to maintain some ancient idea of what America was, even if it's just black and white. It doesn't include you in that.
Well, I think that, my read on where we're going to be in 2042 is I don't think it's going to quite go the way that people think it is going to go. Because there's still, think about it. In 2042, white people will only be half. That's a lot of white people, right? That's still a lot of white people.
But we can contain them.
Right.
We'll build more suburbs.
No, because white people will still have a whole lot of money. All the valuable downtown real estate, Chicago, Manhattan, LA, white people own all of it. We have a lot. And you also have, so white people are going to be 50%, but what percentage of mixed race and minority people are going to be assimilated into the middle class and more identifying with the power-holding majority than minority populations today? What I think is going to happen is the whiteness is going to split in two. You're going to have two kinds of white people. One, they're the kind of old school white people who really hang everything on being white and are scared and nervous and retreating further and further into Idaho and West Virginia, and they can't deal
Mountains,
with it.
yeah.
Yeah, mountains. They're going to go to the mountains and they'll be hill people. Then you have other white people like myself who are like, whatever, I don't see integration as any kind of threat. If my son, marries with someone that's a different race and I have a mixed race grandchild, I don't really care because I'm already in the upper middle class, and this is historically true. Working class white people are petrified of immigrants taking over. Upper middle class white people tend to be more tolerant and accepting because you can't really threaten us because we're going to be okay. And I know that my kids are going to have access to the social and cultural and financial capital to remain in power, regardless of how many people
But
of color they associate
you're
with.
assuming stability.
Yeah.
You're assuming that this imbalance can persist for another 30 years. And I think at some point the system itself breaks. And
It is going to break. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. You're going to have a break, which is that you have one portion of white people who are going to break off and de-assimilate themselves and go off to Idaho and be lonely and sad.
Yeah.
And you're going to have one group of white people that it's going to partner with the more assimilated and educated
okay.
branch of white people to be a new beige majority that's going to be part people of color and part white people who are fine with that. And then you're going to have a rump faction of every immigrant group and every racial group who doesn't want to assimilate and integrate, and they're going to be in the corner being very angry that they don't have access to what this new beige majority. Beige is going to be the new white, is what I'm saying.
we got so many quotes tonight.
I don't know.
Do you want to add something?
You
or
don't know?
should we
Go
move
for
on?
it.
Should we keep it going?
It's up to you. I'm going to...
I don't
Go.
necessarily agree with that, even though if race is a social construct, maybe even before, let's say, beige or light skin or Latinos, let's say, become the
And by
next
beige,
white,
I don't
it'll
actually
be,
mean skin color. I
Okay.
mean more cultural bearing.
all right, so then I guess the next white man is the black man.
How so?
Because you're talking about assimilation, and out of all the groups that are immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
we're probably what's happening is that immigrant groups are they're selectively acculturating more and more and more so. They're taking what they like about the old country, about where their parents came from, and what they like about being American, and they're fusing that together. So there's no such thing really as assimilating to what? To what? What are we assimilating to? We have to kind of redefine all of that. I think
Right.
that's
Whiteness
assimilation
used
is
to
one
be
of those.
the gold standard of assimilation. It's not going to be that anymore.
It's not going to be that.
It's not going
no.
to be that anymore. But there are still a lot of white people with a lot of money and a lot of job openings. And so to the extent that you want access to those industries and that you have to conform a little bit that way, even if you don't go as far as people did 50 years ago, where they anglicized their name and deracinated themselves completely. That's why I say beige is the new white.
All right, I definitely disagree, but
All right.
we'll save it for a future forum.
Yeah.
Where did I, oh, we got it on Twitter.
Okay.
All right, this is from,
That's why I picked it. I love that handle.
is Jazz Toilet in the house?
Yeah.
Riffing on the toilet, awesome. How do I have a meaningful conversation about race, thanks for using the hashtag, with a white liberal friend, with a black friend? Who has a, do you want to clarify that?
I just met a white liberal friend who's like, oh, I have a black best friend, so I can talk about it.
So they think that gives them license to be ignorant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like because
It's like a racism insurance card.
yeah, he has an insurance card, and like I can't have any kind of meaningful conversations with him.
Because they lean back on that friend as an excuse.
Or just like they're like, oh, I already know about this.
They think they know everything because they have one person in their lives.
Right.
Is that it?
I guess so.
Okay.
Well, yeah, just, tell them, A, never to say that.
Yeah.
And B, that it's just not true. I mean, I don't know your particular friend.
I don't mean my particular friend.
Right.
Just,
Is it you? It's an amazing costume.
Malcolm Magical.
I just mean, like white liberals who are like, oh, I already know about all this. You know,
Yeah.
I took ethnic studies. I read all the articles. We don't need to talk about this because I already know.
So the thing that
So
pops
there's no
in,
conversation.
the things that pop into my head immediately, and it's based on no study. This is fake science coming at you real strong. Shift the category, right? Would this person say that about North Carolina versus South Carolina? Would they say this about Scandinavia versus Norway? Would they say this about baseball versus hockey? Like you can know one thing and somehow make it present to them that doesn't mean they know everything. Because does that rule apply anywhere else in their lives? Like I had a hot dog, I know how all hot dogs taste. I've eaten at Chili's, so I know how Mexican food tastes. Like that doesn't follow. And there are other areas in their life where I think that is self-evidently true. And you'd be like, now this is true times 1,000 of that because we're talking about human beings. And there's no box that categorizes all human beings because you know one person. So I think there's probably people in their lives, whether it's a gender line or a sexual orientation. If they know one homosexual person, do they think they know all gay people? If they know one woman, do they think I know all women? Yes, all women, hashtag, right? Like there is an opportunity to not make it about race for the purposes of reminding them that there's uniqueness and diversity. There's a spectrum everywhere. You can't know one thing and think that makes you know everything. That's my fake science gut.
Can I move on
Yeah,
to
go
one
ahead.
thing? Okay.
Yeah.
So Peter A. Holden. I
Center
loved your
section.
tweet. Okay. Instead of diverse, how about
Oh, proposal.
Ooh, I like it.
amalgamagical? That is awesome.
Amalgam magical. It's a mouthful, but I see sparkles. I see a rainbow
It's really
with sparkles.
dreamy. It's
Yeah.
really like
Sounds like a
it's
cereal.
like the promised land.
Yeah.
It's like
Amalgam magical. Thank you so much for
it's
that.
really nice.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
All right, is there a question there? We're just going to, all right, we'll
No,
go to the
we're
next
just
one.
giving some
All
love.
right, well, we will use for the balance of the evening. Will we use amalgamagical in lieu of diversity? We
Yes.
can't speak beyond that, but we will for the rest
So
of the
this
evening.
is a question of us about y'all. Is the race, gender, and age diversity or lack thereof in this audience what you would expect, concerning, or in the way of real progress? So what do we think of you people? And when I say you people,
I'm really impressed by those people because I was expecting it to be a little bit more like Okay, like Girls on HBO.
She kept actually in
Which
the
I
email
actually-
chain. She was dissing Brooklyn pretty hard.
No.
She
I
was.
was-
You
no,
had
no.
expectations of Brooklyn, not dissing, but you had.
All right,
So
let me
I
just
was
point this
dissing
out. I was having a
a-
conversation with Raquel a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about gentrification in Brooklyn. She used to live in Brooklyn. She's like, yeah, I just got tired of Brooklyn. I had to leave. It's just getting too white. I'm like, when did you leave? She said, 1997.
It was actually 1996.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But I'm in Brooklyn Heights, so I was expecting like, honestly, like older, just white, not cool, not hip, because I'm seeing older white faces, but with a lot of hip outfits and
So you can
so it's
stay.
like, yeah, so please stay for the rest of the and a little less amalgamagical than what I'm seeing because of where Brooklyn has
Yeah.
gone.
If you identify as male, raise your hand. All right, hands down. If you identify as female, raise your hand. Ladies' night, apparently.
Yeah.
You got a discount, right? It was Tuesday night at Brooklyn Historical Society, Wednesday night at Brooklyn Historical Society. If you identify as neither male nor female and you want to raise your hand, all right. So much more, I don't know, it's like 3/5 female by my fake math. And then, I didn't have expectations to directly answer this.
Right.
I remember looking around the corner from the illustrious green room over there, closet, and I just thought, wow, like there's a range of hairstyles. Really?
I will just say this: it is better than giving a talk about race in Vermont, which
fair?
Which I've done, and there's a
Fine.
distinct phenomenon, especially at least when I do these sorts of things. If you're a white, this is much better than being a white guy standing at a podium explaining how racism works. That never goes. But if when I've done solo events, if I have a good mixed race audience and I can make some of the black people laugh, then the white people will relax and be like, okay, it's okay to laugh, and it'll be fine. But if it's a majority white audience and there's like 3 black people there and the black people just like aren't feeling it, then none of the white people will have permission to enjoy themselves at all, and everyone will just sit there like, and it's horrible. It's like I've never died as a stand-up comedian, but I imagine that's what it feels like.
I don't know why
But
you're looking at me when you say that. I don't know why you're looking at me when you say that. I've read about this not doing well as a comic. I don't know what that feels like. I see it on Wikipedia the first time yesterday. I'm like, that must suck. That is a painful, tragic experience. To not
So
succeed.
I give this audience a thumbs up.
Yeah, I give you 2.
Okay.
I feel like we're not talking about intersectional oppression. All right, church. I feel like somebody busted out some fans on that. Well, preach. So that it's a 2-part question, but let's focus on that part. Intersectional oppression. Why have we failed to overlay these issues?
Do you want to define intersectional
Well,
oppression for people who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea
Including
that
me,
there is no
so go ahead.
single, again, fake science coming at you, not the Wikipedia definition, but the intuitive definition that race, gender, sexual orientation, these things are inseparable, class, and they play out in different ways depending on where you are in those spaces. So you can't have a solo conversation about race if you don't also take gender into account or class into account as examples. So
Right.
how does the intersection of these
But I think
things play out?
I think we did talk about black male, brown male bodies and
bit,
how,
yeah.
right?
We've also
And-
only been doing this for like an hour, so.
Yeah, and when we're talking about privilege and being born non-white, I'm assuming if you're born, you're either a woman, a male, or somewhere in between. So I think that we did, but not maybe we're guilty of not going in depth. I don't know.
I also
it's
feel
only
like
been a
this
few.
is it's very difficult to have these conversations because you can never please. This is such a broad topic. There are
Yeah.
so
Well,
many.
we did say
different-
about race.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's a
and
big-
there
that's a big
are
test.
so many intersections
Yeah.
of this subgroup or that you can never please everyone. And part of I think part of the reason people shy away from these conversations is
People, I wrote a 2,000-word article for Slate about a subject, and I got barrage of tweets like, you didn't talk about this, you didn't talk about this. So, well, it was 2,000 words. Like, I picked one thing I was going to talk about, and I didn't talk about the other 90 things because I only had 2,000 words to talk about that one thing. So hang around long enough, we'll have some beers, we'll get to intersectionality.
All right, we're going to talk about white people. This is a 2-page comment. Someone actually wrote page 1. They put a page count.
I'm glad we got that on a card rather than in a monologue.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, and then they scratched out all of page 2. It seems to me that white people, unless they are surrounded predominantly by people of color, do not realize how much whiteness is talked about when they're not around. That being said, I wonder how important it is to make the signification of whiteness more public, more of a deliberate practice, i.e., let's not be afraid to talk about whiteness in mixed company. Hope that makes sense. Thanks. The tone just jumped off the page. I hope you don't mind my interpretive license. That I almost said interpretive whiteness. So yeah, I mean, I guess you spoke out, Raquel, very clearly about feeling invisible in this black-white conversation. But there's also another line that's drawn between the people of color conversation and whatever white people do, and like what is that? And I guess instead of asking questions, I'll throw out my own thoughts on this. I think we need to talk about whiteness as a part of the thing, and maybe we don't call it privilege. I know you have a problem with that word, which somebody wanted to get into, but it allows this escape hatch to walk through the world as if color doesn't matter. And I've on my show recently, we had the person who did the Whiteness Project, this documentary film project up in Buffalo, New York. They sat a bunch of white people down in front of cameras and just let them think out loud. And there were some thoughts there.
Right.
There were some definite thoughts and a lot of resentment, a lot of why are we doing all these things for the black people? The resentment that you spoke of earlier comes out very clearly on this film, intersecting with class heavily, especially in a city like Buffalo. So I would love to, in some ways, not pass the baton, but share the baton a little bit more on what a race conversation is. That's why, part of why you're here, is because you did some of this work solo for yourself.
Right. What I've found is the power of whiteness. I think white supremacists understand whiteness the least. Because there's just these
and
dukes.
Grammar. They understand
grammar.
They're very bad with
technology,
grammar.
And history,
economy,
and math,
culture,
and lots of other things.
Dancing.
But white supremacists are these rubes who've bought into the promise of whiteness that it is this pure white race that's been endowed with, all the superiority over the other races, which is all nonsense. But they bank everything on the purity of the white race and keeping the white race pure from all contamination. I don't think that's actually where the power of whiteness comes from. The power of whiteness comes from the fact that it can mean anything. And as I think Ta-Nehisi Coates said on his blog once, whiteness is very protean in nature. And if you look at the definition of whiteness from when this country was founded to what this definition is today, it's completely changed. And that's sort of why I think what I do about the year 2042, and beige being the new white. Whiteness will be whatever it needs to be to stay right where it is. And that is the enduring underlying power of that idea. It's a horrible idea, it's a pernicious idea, we can all admit why it's bad, but let's acknowledge why it's so powerful. Communism is dying, Nazism is gone, fascism is not out of vogue, but white supremacy just marches on year after year. Why is that? Why is it so powerful? Because it's so infinitely flexible that it can be anything. Like in the French Revolution, you had 40 families who had all the money, and you said, that's the aristocracy. All right, well, let's kill them. And then we kill them all, and we have a new regime. Well, white people are the ruling class in America. Well, who's white people? Well, it's whoever we say it is. Okay. Then how are you going to behead that aristocracy? It just mutates one year to the next. Now it includes Catholics. Now it includes Jews. It will include and expand. And if we need to kick out some white trash, to say, you don't belong anymore, go to Idaho, whiteness will do that. Whiteness will get rid of those people.
I apologize to the people of Idaho who are going to watch this. Raquel, go ahead.
I'm going to come at it from a gray space and also a transnational space.
Yeah.
I visit the Dominican Republic often, where whiteness and blackness, if you look at the whole island, is defined really differently than what we even think it's defined as. If you listen to Skip Gates, he's leading you down the wrong path. It's not the way he looks at race in the Dominican Republic through a white supremacist lens. The way we look at it has to do with economics. So, for example, I ran into a doctor, a dentist, who phenotypically looks like, let's say, a shorter version of Michael Jordan. And and one of my mentors there said, "You know that guy right there?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, he's considered white here. It's almost like in Brazil, if you look at Pele, the soccer player, Pele. The more money he got.
He bought his way in.
He bought his way in.
Yeah.
He became white, and people stopped referring to him as being black. In the Dominican Republic, it's that way. In the Dominican Republic, there's areas also in Haiti, Pétionville, for example, where the ruling class they're considered white, and that ruling class is very close to the ruling class in the Dominican Republic. So they look at basically power, race phenotypical looks, what you look like has nothing to do with it. It's like how much power and money you have. And that's basically where I look at the Caribbean, I look at where America started when I want to kind of gauge where we're going here in North America. So maybe it's another way of saying what you were saying, right? Or whiteness, blackness is fluid.
Yeah, I don't know if I wonder or I just simply hope for it instead. The perseverance of whiteness, I still feel like that's temporary. I want it to be temporary for sure. And I'm also looking at people who are so bored with the program they have to leave now. Have a great night. I'm just kidding. I know you got to go. You talked about transnational, and someone mentioned India and China, and like China in particular. Like, there are things that are going to change in such dramatic ways that I think are happening outside of even the bubble of this conversation. Mm-hmm. And what is, the power of culture, as we've seen American culture really riding on a lot of black culture for so long, yet still within a white power structure, but jazz, hip hop, basketball, like all these things are like black faces and black movement are sold as American all around the world. But what happens when the internet is mostly in Mandarin? And what happens culturally when the world power keeps shifting away from
the world power is going to keep shifting,
Davos
and China is huge and is going to challenge us on huge economic ways. A friend of mine is a linguist, and the interesting thing about English, and whiteness and English, rose up in the world contemporaneously, obviously with European exploration and expansion. And the interesting thing about English is pointed out, English sort of took over the world at a very propitious and an advantageous moment in technology. Whereas, a long time French was the language of the court of the world, and these different languages shifted. English came along with the typewriter, with the internet, with the computer and all these forms of technology. And English has the advantage of being infinitely flexible. Like the French are very rigid in their language. the English language,
they don't give a damn.
Like whiteness, can absorb.
They put OMG in the dictionary. So whiteness English is a language that can expand infinitely to be, whatever it needs to be, whereas Mandarin and Chinese language is very inaccessible, very difficult, and they're trying to change that now. They're trying to make Mandarin easier so that it can be more of an international language. Mm-hmm. So, and to that extent, is whiteness going to be like English, where it'll just, like I say, continue to mutate and expand and adapt, like a virus? I don't know. And that's not to advocate for whiteness, but I'm just trying to predict what whiteness is going to do. Yeah.
You were talking about language, you're talking about American English? Or?
Well, that's my point exactly, is that there's British English, there's American English, there's international, Spanglish forms of English. It can mutate and spread. It's not a rigidly defined thing.
You could spell honor in 3 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's more in the pile. We don't have a plan. Exactly.
Right.
But it is 8, and we want to save room for. What if we just have to do the mic thing?
Let's do the mic.
Let's do the mic thing. Let's hear some of your voices too.
Right.
As a hand, thank you so much. Why don't you start where you are, and then this brother with the hat and the scarf. You cold still? You're very zipped up, very tight. Okay. Yeah. Let it go.
This column right here. Hi.
Hi.
Great. Yeah, so I just want to maybe expand on why you wouldn't think that intersectionality would be I asked that question and the second question about privilege. which I won't go into. But if we could maybe talk about why you wouldn't think it's important to maybe have this be a really like intersectional conversation, only because going back to what you had mentioned about how like race is a social construct, why not like include all other social constructs that equally affect our perception and our projection of what is race? So if you could just expand on that.
I'll give you a quick answer. Ferguson was in the news.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's just, we picked that.
Yeah, it
Um,
wasn't.
It wasn't an
It
intentional
was not
omission.
a conscious effort. I think in some ways, probably for most of us, if not all of us, this concept of intersectionality is baked in, and it's not like we're going to have an intersectional conversation about race. It's kind of open sourced it up. And to give you a quick background on even why this is happening, which we never did.
Yeah.
So
We're going to do an introduction now.
words were said and printed in books. And so I wrote this book, How to Be Black. I met Tanner because of that book through a mutual friend. He wrote, Some of My Best Friends Are Black. I was asked to blurb it. I was like, why would I do that? And then I read it. I was like, what would a dude named Tanner know about race? And it turns out a few things that I thought worth sharing. Raquel and I had, so we wrote these books, we kind of blurbed, and we did a live event to kind of like, we thought about going on tour together. And we couldn't do that because it takes a lot of work. But we did do one live event almost exactly a year ago in Manhattan. You're a much better audience than they were. And called it a national conversation about the conversation about race. It was me and Tanner and Soledad O'Brien, and we're experimenting with this format of like, can we talk to each other and to a group?
Right.
Raquel and I had met on CNN many years ago with one of her favorite people, Don Lemon, to talk about Obama and race stuff. And we wanted to continue this conversation and expand it so it actually isn't just black and white.
Right.
So we reached out to Raquel and said, yo, are you down? And we had a lot of lunches and a lot of emails, and we're honing in on this event. So this came out of an attempt to expand the conversations we were each having, or expand out of the pigeonholing that we have been put into to like represent your people, right? Talk about what Latinos think about immigration, and then not want to hear when you want to talk about something else, as an example. So this was like the second iteration of that live event, basically 1 year later. But so there was no conscious effort to like avoid intersectionality, but I think we're accepting with openness that it is necessarily a part of the context of the discussion. But we all have like race in the titles of our work, and have been called upon and chosen to some degree to explore race as like a primary variable, in identity.
Right.
Is that, you want to
And
answer?
also, we wanted to talk about the podcast. And
Oh yeah, we're trying to do a podcast, and so we're like, maybe this could be like
Yeah.
a testing. Do we
We're
fight
testing, yeah.
all the time, and then no one wants
Yeah.
to hear that?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We're going to actually bark at each other the entire time. Like, we're.
Glasses, jacket, shirt, man with the hat.
Doing? Hello? Oh, I wrote the first question about the anxiety.
Yes.
One. The reason why I put that question together in a sense is I'm just thinking that it seems like, we talked about Obama and the election. What brought me to that was we came together, we elected, but it's the process that we took to elect President Obama as far as little donations. It seemed like the whole community got together. And as soon as he came into the White House, Citizens United, the Manchurian Supreme Court, just took that power away from the regular American, to make the smaller, richer, foreign donors, all that type of stuff come into the politics and really rewrite the direction where America is going. So I just want you to, because we're talking about race, but I think there's a lot going on that is really taking away our entire definition of what being American actually is.
Here.
Yeah.
I think it got ratcheted up after President Obama's election. I think that rewrite has been ongoing from the glorious statements in the founding documents, which were never intended for most of the people in this room to benefit from. So the American democracy has always been kind of a sham. Like, it's really good marketing. And it lured a lot of people here and a lot of investors and a lot of resource extractors. Like, yo, I can get mine and keep it? That sounds good. And let's talk about equality a little bit. So the promise has never been matched by the reality. We've tried to get closer, and that's part of our great project. I think the hyper reaction to the president, I underestimated. I will admit that right here. Like, I got all caught up. I was knocking on doors in Texas and Virginia and Pennsylvania, and I was like, yes, open source democracy. We're writing this campaign. We're going to write the rules, and just got slammed in the face with the reality that the sport doesn't get played down here. And there's the donors were always there, the lobbyists were always there, the fear of people who have had power, and the very concerted and collaborative decision to make sure that whatever this president said was never going to happen. Like, it was just never going to happen. And so much so that we heard them say that out loud. Right? They like, we're going to stymie everything we're for. We're not for if you put the word Obama in front of it. Like, that's what the whole political party did about a Heritage Foundation originated healthcare plan that Mitt Romney successfully implemented, about start nuclear proliferation treaties, about everything. They're like, no, we don't believe in that shit anymore. Until our guys at the top. And then the way the electoral system works here, like the dissuasion of voting, the impatience or lack of persistence that a lot of us have for the midterms, right? The follow-through is not there.
Right.
So we showed up for the big game and not the scrimmages and the training in between, which determine how your team really does.
Right, and I don't know that I would say we really came together to elect Obama. The beauty of Obama's campaign, as far as getting himself elected and it was all hope and change, and yes, we can. So Obama ran
And also not Bush.
and also not Bush, and also not
Like,
Bush.
Please not again.
Didn't vote
And
for the
not
Iraq War.
Palin. No.
Yeah, and not Palin. But, Barack Obama presented himself as hope and change. And every single people could fill that vessel with whatever they aspired to. And that was part of my inspiration writing the book. I was like, all right, there are a lot of white people supporting Obama. There are a lot of black people supporting Obama. There are a lot of Hispanic people supporting Obama. But we're all doing it in different zip codes and possibly for different reasons. And I think you saw that, he's a galvanizing figure, and we all saw what we wanted to through him. And I think that was very deliberate. His campaign was marketing, branding, brilliance from day one. And that's not to say he's not a man of substance, because I think he is. But that campaign was genius from start to finish as a phenomenon. And so, he's almost an anomaly in the system. There was a study that came out 2 days ago that America is no longer a functional democracy. We are an oligarchy where the interests of the middle class, as defined by polling and voting and everything else, are not followed most of the time. The interests of the top 5% are followed all of the time. And when your interests coincide with the top 5%, you're like, democracy is being responsive, when actually it's not.
Yeah.
You just happen to agree with the top 5% on that issue, and they're getting what they want, and you feel like you're getting what you want. But we are no longer in that sense of functioning democracy until you get the money out of politics and everything else.
Hooray.
And quickly, I was very cautiously optimistic about it from the beginning. He was making a lot of lofty promises about immigration that I just knew he was not going to follow through on. And the loftier they got, the more I was like not really believing. I stopped kind of believing what he was saying, even though I voted for him, because I could not live in a country where Palin and McCain were, running it. So I voted for him, but I think I think Hillary Clinton could have been a great president as well. And one thing that she has, that she's shown that she has, that he hasn't, to my lament, is balls, or as Palin would say, cojones. And I feel like, all the other, the Bush, everybody else, like they went against what they, Bush went against what the Democrats wanted, and he was like, whatever, I'll just take the hit. I don't care what happens. I'm going to stand for mine, whatever. Obama hasn't done that.
The question
He's
is,
been kind of like, so.
the
what?
question is, has he not done that, or has he done as much as he can under circumstances?
He hasn't. Well, you shouldn't be making the lofty freaking promises, especially around like things like immigration, and then just being like, I can't do anything without Congress. You knew you were like going to be fighting an uphill battle the whole time.
I think he was shocked.
He was shocked.
Because look, this is purple America, right? This is 2004. There's no red America. There's no blue America. We're all purple, like the guy on PBS with the kids and whatnot. And he believed it. He came to this office, and the first thing he did was say, "How can I work with you?" And they were like, "Go fuck yourself."
Right.
You know, and he's like, whoa, 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 I'm the president. And they yelled at him during his State of the Union, calling him a liar, right? Like there was a level of like anger, disrespect, and like totally unprecedented. Even Bill Clinton, who was accused of murdering his friend, didn't deal with some of the types of things that President Obama has. And I think he just got the extra dirt because he's the first.
Right.
You know, and they're like going to test him and remind him that there's only so far you can go without us.
Right.
Where's the mic? Oh, good.
So thank you for this panel. So as a millennial, I feel like for me, what's really important about the conversation about race is justice, because race is one of the biggest markers for how justice is delivered, whether it's in the criminal justice system or education or health across the board. I liked that you touched upon the 1% and how 96.1% of the 1% is white. And among the 5%, 88% of that is white. And you know, the invisible, like a fifth of us are not even visible in this conversation of the black-white binary, which includes huge numbers of different types of Asian Americans that are running many, many companies and tech companies that decide futures of black and brown people, as well as Native people, and the role of white supremacy on their communities, as well as now Latinos, which is goes back in history, from Chicano history. You know, all of that America was Mexico, you know, crossed the border to them. So how do we complexify this conversation to really shift the national narrative on race itself and the story of race? Thinking about solutions and moving forward, because that's what my generation really cares about, because we're tired of just being beaten down and told that, you know, we can't do anything about it, and there's something wrong with us.
You know, there was an interesting moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That
There's two things going on here. One, yes, there's an incredibly complex multiracial reality that race and white supremacy affects all of these groups, and discussion needs to be had. But you know, when affirmative action first started, and all these programs that were put in place to redress, you know, the ills of slavery and Jim Crow, for a long time that was seen as, you know, programs for blacks. But when the laws were instituted, they were written for, you know, all minorities got access. And in the early 90s, people stopped talking about affirmative action because the word had become poison. People started talking about diversity, right? And it was no longer about justice for the people who'd been victimized by slavery and Jim Crow. It was about promoting diversity, because diversity was good for companies. And so therefore, and part of the selling point to the old black establishment was, hey, white people are tired of hearing your complaints, so we're going to take black concerns and we're going to make them a Trojan horse out of gay rights and the handicapped and the elderly and women and all these other ethnic groups, and we're just going to, you know, slip black people in there with them, and everyone's going to get to go in together, and we're going to make this big pitch about how diversity is good for companies. And all the old line, black institutions who'd been victimized by Jim Crow said, hey, that's great for all of our, you know, Asian and brown brothers from around the world, but this is about us because we were the ones who were victimized by slavery and segregation. You just got here. You chose to come here. You were an immigrant. Get in line behind the Native Americans and the blacks, because this is our conversation. And that conversation really got hijacked and turned into diversity. And as a result of that, you know, as many challenges as other immigrant communities of color face, you know, Asians are doing okay, Indians are, you know, moving up, and blacks continue to fall further and further behind, because this promise that diversity was going to help everyone, including the adjudicated victims of slavery, Jim Crow, hasn't come true. Diversity has more helped, you know, these diversity programs and blah, blah, blah. They skim the top of the Asian and Indian and you know, other communities, and low-income blacks just fall further and farther behind, and companies say, hey, look at all our diversity. Look at this guy from Ghana whose dad is a middle-class diplomat. That's diversity. And blacks who suffered the depredations of Jim Crow continue to fall further and further behind. So while, yes, we do need to have this multipolar conversation, there is a black-white conversation that needs to be had, and we need to have both of them.
all the conversations about the conversation about race. We have to wrap this, guys, because you're getting tired. I can tell because I'm getting tired, and I'm people like you are. we are going to move to wherever the book signing thing is happening.
Yep.
Is that here or is that out there?
I think it's here.
Oh, so we're gonna not move at all, but you're gonna be able to move soon. I
Stretch.
inelegantly am wrapping this as the pseudo half moderator of this. I want to thank you two for being here. I want to receive that thanks. Thank you all for showing up. I learned a lot. We learned a lot.